I want to welcome everybody to the Resident and Family Support Council meeting that we hold on the second and the fourth Tuesday of every month. These meetings' purpose is to make sure that we empower people with information so that they can have that experience that they need, want, and deserve when they're navigating this long-term care world that can be very, very difficult to do. We understand that people go through a lot. It's emotional. There's a lot happening in people's lives at that time when you're getting admitted into a nursing home. And we recognize that as long-term care ombudsmen, we want to be here to support that. And we want to make sure that you feel empowered with the information that you need to make it a successful experience for yourself, and that you do feel that you're in control of what's going on in your world and not up to the device of someone else telling you what you need to do. I do want to remind everybody before we get into today's topic that we do have our YouTube channel where you can download many videos from that. You can watch those on demand at any time. We get a lot of views for those. Sometimes a topic that we talk about might not be important to you or seem necessary for you at the given moment, but then down the line it does. Or you have a friend that's going through something and they need to be able to access that information. So please let people know about those videos. They get a lot of good views and we're very excited. We have over 40 videos on there right now, and they keep growing with every meeting. So we want to encourage people to use that as a good resource for yourselves. We're also on Facebook, the Illinois Ombudsman. We're on Facebook as well, and we'd love for you to follow us. Share information that you see on that, and to be able to be engaged with us through that as well. So with all of that being said, what I wanted to do was introduce Eric today. We've got Eric Parker here, who is who's an expert on contracts. Eric is a lawyer. So we thought, who's better to talk about this than a lawyer who really does work on the side of those who live in long-term care. And so we invited him to come and talk with us today, because this experience about moving into a nursing home and they hand you all of these papers and you've got to sign everything, and what am I signing? And it becomes very, very overwhelming. So we wanted to talk about this a little bit. But before we do that, Eric, can you just share a little bit about who you are?
Sure. My name's Eric Parker, and I'm an elder law attorney. I live in Evanston. I'm based, my office is based in Chicago. And I volunteer and speak for a lot of issues facing the elderly and the disabled. I've been doing this for about 30 years now, and I love the field of aging. So I'm thrilled to be here. Particularly,
well, we're lucky to have you. We're lucky to have you, Eric, and we're very glad that you decided to join us today to have this conversation, because this is something we've been wanting to talk about as a work group for quite a while. Because we get questions like this all the time. What should I be signing? What can I be signing? So I'm really looking forward to getting a deeper understanding about all of this myself. So thank you. If you want to share your screen, that would be fantastic. That way then we can follow along on the slides. And if anybody has any questions, do feel free to put those into the chat, as well as you can unmute your microphone if that's easier for you to do it that way, or if you're on the phone and you don't have the ability to be able to type anything to the chat, please feel free to unmute. And then we also have our worker bees that work in the background who start putting in different things into the chat bar. Any links that we start to talk about, might be sharing, might be of interest, and then also just some common ones, such as how to contact the ombudsman in your area. So be looking in the chat for that stuff as well.
okay, I'm going to take 1 second to see if I can change around the configuration of my screen so that I can see questions as they come up. And so far I can't. So Lee, if you see something come in the chat that somebody wants answered, just speak up, okay?
I most certainly will. I'm not shy with regards to that.
All right. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm particularly glad to be invited by the Ombudsman program. One of my mentors in the field of aging was the former ombudsman for the city of Evanston. So I know quite a bit about the program, and I'm a big fan. So that being said, let me start, and we'll talk about nursing home issues. I'm going to try to do my best to gear it towards this audience. So we'll skip over some things more quickly, and some I'll try to dig in and spend more time on. But I'm eager to make it interactive. And so at any point in time, if you can manage to get my attention one way or another, I'm happy to stop and answer questions along the way. And I'll try to also leave some room at the end. I will say that my attitudes and beliefs about nursing homes are formed in part as a result of experiences of lots and lots of clients over the years, but it never really got home to me in the same way as it did when my father went into a nursing home. And he has since passed. But I have to say that although it wasn't the experience he would have chosen, it was professionally a really good experience for me to see what this is like firsthand, because there's no level of expertise that makes you feel qualified when it's you that's dealing with it.
Oh, that's so true, Eric. I mean, I know I went through this experience myself with my stepfather, and it changed my perspective immensely.
Yeah,
You know, it really does. Yeah, so that's very important to hear.
okay, so there we go. So the first thing I thought I'd talk about just for a minute is the nursing home selection process. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think we probably have a lot of people who already have a family member in a nursing home. But it is always possible you might have to switch. So a couple things to keep in mind. Medicare.gov does have a pretty good listing of nursing home violations and ratings. I think that it's important to take them with a grain of salt. I did have an experience once where I noticed that really quite a good nursing home had ratings that weren't so great. And when I dug into it a little bit further, what I realized was that other facilities were sending their wound care patients to this facility because they were good at handling wounds. And so statistically, it looked like they had a lot of wounds there, and it wasn't that they were doing a bad job. It was kind of the opposite, that they were doing a good job. But nevertheless, information's important. And so I think it's worth looking at the ratings.
Yes, and last time we did our last meeting, we had the Quality Improvement Organization, Telegen, talk with us about Medicare.gov, Care Compare. And so if anybody is interested in more information on Care Compare, you can go and look at the video on that. So that was a really good, we had a kind of a deep dive into it. So it was really beneficial for all of us. So I'm glad you brought that up into here.
Great. Also, there are private nursing home consultants. I've used them with clients from time to time, particularly when you have when I have clients that are going to be going on Medicaid and they are going to be spending down all their assets on care one way or the other. Sometimes I will say, look, you've got $40,000 left. Prepay your funeral because Medicaid will allow you to do that, and hire a nursing home consultant to help you find the best possible nursing home that would accept Medicaid. Can be money well spent. Keep in mind, though, that some of the private nursing home consultants make their money by collecting a fee from the nursing homes. And so it is important to know how they get paid.
How would we find that out? Is that a question we could ask them?
Yeah, they'll tell you. The ones that get paid by the nursing home will be upfront about it if you ask. And usually they'll tell you it doesn't make any difference to their recommendations, but I think it's worth knowing.
Yes, I agree.
And then, obviously word of mouth. When I say this, I would say, what other families have to say is really important and relevant. But if you happen to know somebody who's in the profession, even more so, important to ask those questions. And then I did make a notation of a few things that you might consider checking if you're going to be searching for a nursing home. I think in particular, going at meal time so you can see what meals look like there can be really important. If you're able to visit during non-normal business hours, they probably won't agree to give you the tour at that time, but it's something to consider because some of these places are really different places at 9 o'clock at night than they are at 1 in the afternoon. So
True.
Yeah.
True.
And I would consider asking if they have a resident or family council there, because if they do, and you can reach out to whoever's in charge of that, they'll give you the inside scoop about what it's really like there.
And we did a meeting on that as well. We had one of our meetings on resident councils and another one on family councils that actually was done by Janine, who I see has joined us here today as well. So, that's great.
Good, I'm glad. If you're able to talk to a resident, that also can be really enlightening as far as what to expect. And the one thing I always like to reinforce to people is nice decor is not the same as good care. And the nursing homes you'll see have caught on to this. There's an awful lot of them that have a really nice lobby with natural wood floors and fresh flowers put out. But they're understaffed. And so, just keep in mind that how it looks when you walk in and how the lobby looks may be impressive to you, but that doesn't necessarily translate to they're paying enough nurses to work enough hours.
So true, so true. I'm glad you're talking about this, because it is important for people to be able to feel like they can make that conscious decision, that it should be starting right from the beginning. It's, that shopping, you should shop for this. It shouldn't just be something that somebody tells you this is where you need to go.
So true. Okay, I thought I'd spend just a minute on paying for nursing home care. People are probably painfully aware of this at this point in time. But in my practice, I do find that people routinely don't have a great understanding of how it works. And so I'll just say, pretty much your options are some form of government benefits or private pay. And first, I'll start with Medicare, because the first thing people always think is, hey, is Medicare going to cover this? And the answer, and often they have a misperception because they're transferred from the hospital for a period of rehabilitation and told that Medicare is going to cover it. And it's true. If you've been hospitalized for a requisite number of days, generally 3, and you need rehabilitation in a facility that can't be done at home, Medicare will pay for up to 100 days of rehabilitation. If any of you are in the field, you're probably laughing right now because nobody's getting the 100 days at the moment. And I was just at a seminar for attorneys last week about how you can try to get more days, and it's a complicated mess. But many people go in for that period of rehabilitation under Medicare benefits. What's important is that when those benefits run out, they will often give you not very much notice, sometimes a week, sometimes less than a week, and they will say Medicare has run out, which is not always 100% true, but they will say that. And at that point in time, you have basically 2 options. You can start paying privately for them to remain in the facility, or they can go on Medicaid, but only if they qualify. And qualifying means you are out of other assets, with the exception of $2,000. There's a lot of ins and outs to that I'll touch on in a few minutes, but basically you have to be out of money for Medicaid to pick it up.
Well, last week I even got a contact from a girlfriend saying my mother went into the nursing home because she's been in the hospital, and I asked how she was doing, and she said she went into the nursing home so she'll be good for 100 days. And I said, nah. I was like, she said, well, the hospital social worker told me she has 100 days. And I was like, she has up to 100 days, and it's never that. So it's really difficult. And I hate to say it, but my girlfriend chose not to believe me, because I said, you need to start thinking of plans for when they're going to give you that very short window of what's going to be the next step for mom. Because it's very rarely you don't have 100 days where you could sit back and say, now we can relax for a little bit before we think about what's next. You've got to start right away. What's the next thing that's going to happen here in that care path?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to touch for a second on the spousal impoverishment rules. So this is, if a person needs to go onto Medicaid, the law acknowledges that their spouse needs some money still to exist. The amount that they believe that the spouse needs to exist is not nearly enough. Nevertheless, it's important to know that if a married couple, one of them goes into the nursing home, the other one is not going to lose everything. And actually, one of the things that's written into the Nursing Home Care Act in Illinois is that the facility is supposed to advise you of your rights to avoid spousal impoverishment. But it can be a little tricky, so I'm just going to briefly set them forth here. If you have a spouse going into a nursing home, they're going to look at both of your assets. So it doesn't matter if everything's in the wife's name and the husband's going into the nursing home or vice versa. They look at both people's assets. And through transfers and some other things, you can arrange for the spouse that is not going in the nursing home to keep about $109,000. I think it's $109,560, and it hasn't gone up in a shockingly long period of time. But they can keep $109,000 plus a house. I put down up to a certain value because it does go up each year. It's currently about $580,000, I believe. But they can keep a house with up to that value. They are also allowed to keep a certain amount of their spouse's income to bring them up to a minimum of $2,700. They can keep one car, jewelry, and household items, and those are basically it. So a lot of times I'll see a couple who can make use of this to protect almost all of their assets for the surviving spouse or for the spouse that's remaining in the community, but they may not be in the right location. And so that's a point where you could talk to a very experienced social worker, or you might consider speaking to an elder law attorney. And I'll just give you a couple examples just so you get a sense of it. If the house is owned jointly, you need to move it out of the name of the one that's going into the facility and solely into the name of the one who is not. If you have more than $109,000 in the bank, but you have a mortgage, you may want to consider taking the money over $109,000 and paying off the house so that that spouse can preserve the full value of that house. They could always borrow against it later if they need the money. And, you know, there are a few other things. If the couple owns two cars, you've got to look at how you can handle that and so forth.
We've thought about doing this as a topic previously in the past, and I don't know if this is a topic that would be of interest to people to dive into deeper. If it is, put that into the chat so that we're aware that this is a topic that people would like us to dive into deeper. We did get another question that popped up when you were talking about Medicare.
Sure.
If a client needs hospice care at a nursing home, is that covered by Medicare?
It is. It is. And I will touch on hospice later also, but the short answer is yes, absolutely, and you should take advantage of it.
Good, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so let's move over, and I want to talk just for a second about the transition to Medicaid, because often it happens while the person is in a facility. So a couple things I'll mention in that regard. The first one is when you're transferred for rehab, and you are on Medicare, it is possible you will get transferred to a rehab facility that does not accept Medicaid, because not every facility does. And that can be an important consideration. If you know the money is relatively modest, and the hospital says, okay, we're going to transfer you to rehab, and you have in the back of your head that your family member may need to stay in that nursing home, you'd be much better off to have them transferred to a facility that would accept Medicaid after the Medicare runs out. Because otherwise what happens is they get to the end of their rehab, maybe it's 20 days, maybe it's 30 days, and now they're going to have to leave and move to another facility. And for those of you who have been through the adjustment of having a family member move to a nursing home, it's not always easy, particularly if dementia is involved. So there's something to consider. You've got to meet the asset requirements, meaning $2,000 or less. Some people don't realize if you do qualify for Medicaid, you do have to pay the patient's income over to the facility, except for that amount that I described that the spouse may be able to keep. So I do find sometimes people move there and they're not real clear on that. And by the time it's been made clear to them, they're 3 months behind. And so that's really important. If they get Social Security, if they get a pension, that money is supposed to go over to the facility, just for the spouse that's in the facility. And you've got to provide documentation. This is something I've got to just really emphasize. When they apply for Medicaid, the facility is going to ask for up to 5 years of financial records, every month's bank statement, every transaction, every account, every asset, everything. And what they're looking for is to make sure that money did not get gifted away or transferred away from the person who's applying for Medicaid. And so lots and lots of people see the nursing home problem coming. They recognize they don't want to lose their assets, and so they start giving things away. Creates an absolute mess. So if you were ever thinking about doing that, contact an elder law attorney first, or talk to anybody first, because they'll tell you there may be a way. There probably isn't, but there might be a way. There are a few things that can be done, but don't start by doing it, because then you'll have a great big headache. And I want to describe briefly also the Medicaid pending process. So during COVID, they were approving everybody pretty much right off the bat. However, under normal circumstances, it can take 2, 3, up to 6 months to approve people for Medicaid. And we are now moving back into a quote unquote normal pattern where they're not just going to be approving everybody immediately. When you are admitted to a nursing home and apply for Medicaid, it can be retroactive to the date you were admitted up to a couple of months. And so if it takes them a couple of weeks to get your application submitted, that's not going to be a problem. And while you are Medicaid pending, the facility is not going to be getting paid, but they should be okay with you remaining there until it gets approved. And so I have seen facilities sometimes hassle people about that when it goes 3, 4, 5 months and they're still not getting paid. And so that's something to be very careful about. They can't generally just kick you out as a result of that.
Now, will the nursing home help with this process?
Yes. So, and that's actually was the last point, is who applies. The
Okay.
nursing home should assist you in applying for Medicaid. It can be done by a nursing home, it can be done by an individual, and it can be done by a lawyer. I generally only counsel people to use a lawyer to do a Medicaid application in a couple circumstances. So one of them would be if you are doing advanced Medicaid planning. So basically you are making transfers that are going to deliberately incur some penalties. It's too much of a discussion for today, but I'll mention that it happens. And if you're doing that, then it's worth it to pay a lawyer. And it's generally pretty expensive to have a lawyer do it. But in most routine cases, the nursing home should help you do it.
That's important for people to know, because I think sometimes people feel that what is going to happen next if mom doesn't have enough money? I don't know enough about this. What am I supposed to do? And so go to the nursing home and talk to them about this. They want to get paid.
Absolutely.
So talk to them, and they should sit there and hold your hand through the entire process and really make sure that they understand that you need them there to help you, to relieve that anxiety as well, because there's nothing worse when you're trying to care for a sick parent as well as take care of yourself through the process and feel supported. The facility can help support you with this.
That's great. Okay, a couple of brief, first off, rules about nursing home contracts. So when you get to the nursing home, very quickly, someone is going to come to you and say, okay, but you need to sign a contract. If they're going to be here, they have to have a contract. It needs to be signed right away. Administration is bugging me about it, so on and so forth. The first thing I would say is do not sign under pressure. It is not quite the incredibly urgent thing that they make it out to be. Their administration, their accountants, they would like it signed immediately, but you do not have to sign it immediately. If they wanted to discharge your relative, if they are already in the nursing home, they would have to go through a involuntary discharge procedure before they could do anything. So what I generally tell my clients is tell them that your lawyer needs to review it.
Good advice. Thank you for that, Eric. I think that can right there in itself, that can be a little bit of relief for people as they're entering into this process. So that's very, very good advice.
And by the way, that can be, you can ask for that relief even if you are not actually consulting a lawyer.
Good idea.
You can just take that time and review it yourself if you want to. There are definitely circumstances where I think it's good to have a lawyer review it, but I'm just saying, for purposes of buying yourself a little time, you can put it off on, hey, the lawyer needs time to look at it.
Good, good
And then
idea.
the third thing is that you can negotiate the contract. They will sometimes tell you that they don't negotiate it, they don't change, they don't accept any changes, all sorts of things. And that is not necessarily true. It's also important, even if you were not going to change any aspect of the contract, it's important to know what it says, because how you act and the actions you take will be affected by that contract. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple of common contract issues. Facilities often will ask the resident to sign the contract, but they also are going to ask the resident representative, and that is kind of a term of art, to sign the contract. So the resident representative is often the person who is the power of attorney for property or that individual, but not necessarily. And that person is promising to do certain things related to the admission of the patient. So the first thing that I want to kind of get across is that if the resident is competent, can make their own decisions, manages their own finances, the resident representative, no one needs to sign as resident representative. And in fact, I think it's better if they don't. So the resident can sign the contract themselves, and that's that.
And that's good to hear, because this is about my life if I'm the resident. So I should be doing it. You know, if I was to go buy a car as an individual, I wouldn't have someone else sign for that car. This is my where I'm living. It's my life.
Absolutely. And then the other thing about it is that that if a person is not able to make decisions for themselves, then it becomes important that someone else is going to sign the document. And that resident representative needs to know the limits of their responsibilities. So for one thing, a resident representative cannot be required to pay for the resident's care if there's a big bill that is run up. With one exception. Usually what the resident representative is saying when they sign that document is that they are going to use the resident's money to pay for the resident's care. Now that might sound like I'm splitting hairs, but here's what the nursing home is worried about. They are worried that, let's say, son is power of attorney with control over mom's finances, that they are going to have, $300,000 in the bank, that they're going to fill out a financial form telling the nursing home that's how much they've got left. And then a week after mom has been admitted to the nursing home, son is going to go to the bank, withdraw $290,000, give it away to the various family members. And now there's no money remaining to pay the nursing home. And the family says, well, it's okay, we're going to apply for Medicaid. But when they submit the Medicaid application, Medicaid is going to deny it because you just gifted away all of mom's assets, which is not allowed under the rules. So now the nursing home has a patient who's not able to pay privately and who can't qualify for Medicaid. And so they now have a patient that that they have to take care of for some amount of time and that they can't get paid for. And so the way they get around that is they say, okay, you're the resident representative. You're not going to be liable personally for mom's debts as long as you use all mom's money to pay for mom's care. Okay. And so no gifting assets. And basically that's why that's there.
And we've heard a lot of situations like that because people don't quite understand that. And then they've gone out and they've done things like put a pool in their backyard and you can't retract that pool. You can't sell that pool back. And so then what happens is now the family does, because it was done with the mom's money or the father's money. And so now they are in a situation where they got to pay for that and they couldn't afford the pool to begin with. So
let's use that and let's take two scenarios. So the first scenario is there's $300,000 in the account. Son is power of attorney, signs as resident representative, and month by month they pay, $10,000 a month for care. Is son going to be liable if there's some balance that remains outstanding after mom dies? No, because they can't be required to be liable for that, as long as they used mom's money for mom's benefit. However, son uses it to buy that swimming pool you described, and now when mom dies, there's $100,000 nursing home bill outstanding. Son can be responsible for that because he signed this contract saying, if I don't use mom's money for mom's care, I'm on the hook for it. And they
Now,
can.
yes. If the son didn't sign the contract, is he still on the hook for it?
Yeah, then possibly not.
Mm,
Yeah.
interesting.
So, and that's one of the important things. So we also sometimes refer to these as anti-gifting clauses, because that's really the goal here, is to make sure there's no gifting.
Mhm.
However, there are circumstances where gifting might be important. So as I described, let's say that all the money is in dad's name, mom has no money, he goes into the nursing home. We want to make a gift over to the mom so she can keep her whole $109,000. You want to make sure that nothing about this nursing home contract is going to prevent that, because you have a legal right to do that. Same thing with the house. You may want to make a gift of the house to the wife who's going to be in the community, and you want to make sure it's not going to interfere with that.
Mhm.
So these are situations where you might want to really think about having a lawyer look at that contract. Another couple examples are if you have disabled children. A nursing home resident with disabled children may be allowed to make gifts for that disabled child's benefit. If you had a caregiver child that was taking care of you for 2 years, you might be able to gift the house to them. And you want to make sure, even though Medicaid allows it, that nursing home contract you just signed doesn't prevent it.
God, it's sounding to me that I may want to call a lawyer with some of these idiosyncrasies, because it does sound that it can get a little complicated here for myself.
Yeah. And what I usually tell people is I get calls sometimes from people saying, do I need to have a lawyer look at my nursing home contract? And sometimes after I hear the circumstances, the answer is no, you really don't. There's nothing surprising or controversial or weird here, but you can always ask the question.
Good.
Okay, couple other contract provisions that come up that people have common issues with: arbitration clauses. So almost every nursing home contract says in it, if you get injured in the nursing home, you are not allowed to file a jury trial in regular civil court to sue us. You must instead go to arbitration, where it will be decided by a neutral arbitrator. I'm putting neutral in quotes, but sometimes they are truly neutral and sometimes not as much. The important thing to know is that they're always in the contract, but they can be removed. You can just cross it out before you sign it. And facilities under the current rules are not allowed to condition admission on you agreeing to sign an arbitration clause. So you can.
That's really important for us to hear, because we hear a lot about this arbitration clause. So I physically can take my pen and I can cross it out.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I'm not saying the nursing home won't balk about it.
Mhm.
They're not supposed to.
Okay. And if they do balk about it, what would be my response? What should I do?
I think it depends, is the answer. You may consider reaching out to a lawyer at that point, or telling them you consulted with a lawyer and you understand under the current rules, admission can't be denied just for you crossing out the arbitration clause. I'm not, by the way, universally opposed to arbitration. I think it's a really good process in a lot of cases that can and should be agreed upon voluntarily. But there are bad arbitration clauses also. It's one of those things that I don't think you should have to give up in order to go into a nursing home.
Okay.
Couple other things, extra services. A lot of places, this applies perhaps more to assisted living or independent living, but sometimes the monthly fee is one thing and the extra services is another thing. I think most people generally understand that, perhaps getting haircuts or getting your nails done are going to be extras that are not covered. But some places include a lot of things as extras. And they do have to be spelled out in the agreement, and it's important to know what you're going to get hit with an extra cost for. And I'll mention also bed hold policies. So Medicaid has it. So what this applies to is you're living in a nursing home, you have to go into a hospital for a treatment because you have an infection, you maybe have pneumonia, et cetera. How long does the facility have to hold your bed back at the nursing home, and can they charge for it? So Medicaid has its own policy. Generally speaking, they have to hold it for 10 days. And they also have to give you some priority in terms of readmission at the facility. Even if it goes beyond the 10 days. So let's say the facility has a waiting list. You're supposed to get bumped up ahead of the people in the waiting list to get back in. But if you are not on Medicaid and you're private pay, then pretty much the bed hold policy is going to be determined completely by that contract you signed. And it could say, we'll hold it for up to 30 days or up to 60 days, but you have to pay the full rate for that whole time period. So it's important to at least know what the bed hold policy is.
That sounds like a very important thing because you don't know how long somebody might need to be in a hospital.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about residents' rights. There's a long list, by the way, of things that are considered resident rights. And there's a really good description on the, what was it? It was the, I can't remember. I know what it was. It was Illinois Legal Aid.
Oh, okay.
They had a really nice summary of it, but the first thing to remember is you don't lose any rights by going into a nursing home. You are guaranteed some additional rights as a nursing home resident, but you don't lose your regular rights when you go there. So that's important to remember.
Yes.
I'm going to mention a few, but not all of them because it would take too long. And there's a lot of things that I think are kind of common sense. But one is that you are allowed to use your own physician. You are not obligated to use only the nursing home physician. As a practical matter, I will tell you that very few physicians outside of the nursing home are going to agree to come see you at the nursing home or maintain responsibility for your care. So this right is tough to obtain. But if, for example, you have a specialist physician you've seen for a lot of years that you really trust, and they are willing to see you, you can be seen by them there.
Yeah, and another caveat to that is that if you go for an appointment, you have to usually pay for either transportation or a family member has to take you to that doctor that you chose if you didn't go to use one of the facility doctors, which can be cumbersome or very complicated for people as well.
It can. And I'm aware that having the right and being able to access it is are two different things. So
yeah.
You have a right to see your medical records. You know how they write stuff in that computer and then they walk away. You can see it. It should not be secret from you if you want to see it.
It's your record, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Your life.
You have a right to be free from unnecessary physical and chemical restraints. I do find nursing homes are doing better about this. The Pioneer Coalition, by the way, has a lot to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
But just so that you are aware, if you happen to have somebody who's in restraints, either physical, literal restraints, or medications that are making it so they are essentially unable to get around on their own, you have a right to balk about that, and there are things they can do. Likewise, you have the right to be free from unnecessary drugs. What I'm talking about here is medication that makes it easier for the nursing home to manage you, but doesn't improve your quality of life. That is not okay. It can be tricky sometimes. There were medications, as an example, that they gave to my father that made him a little more sedated, but without them, he had visual hallucinations, which were very disturbing. I was very happy when they gave him medications to help him be a little more calm. But without monitoring, sometimes people get medications that make them basically like a zombie, and that is not a good thing.
Yes, that's very important. It has to be very person-centered. It can't just be done across the board.
Absolutely. You have a right to consult with an attorney about anything, including neglect at the nursing home. And they have to facilitate that as long as it's during reasonable hours and those types of things. And the attorney is not supposed to be there for promoting purposes. So we're not going to have a better call Saul scenario. Okay. And this one I actually didn't know till I looked it up, just brushing up for this presentation. You have a right to electronically monitor your room in a nursing home if you want to do that.
Yeah.
So
isn't that cool? And
yeah.
if you're interested in that, we did a presentation on that not too long ago. Lawrence Wagner, who is on our planning committee and part of our call today, he did a great presentation on that. So you can look that up on YouTube and look at that as well.
Right. What a good resource. Visitation rules. Illinois does impose a reasonableness requirement. So if you were really, really hot on visiting at 2 a.m, it's possible they might balk about it, but generally you're allowed to have whatever visitors you want. There is a small area where visitation gets weird when the person can't make decisions for themselves and you have a conflictual family. But we're not going to go there today because that's just going.
And that's when you call your ombudsman. They can help.
Yeah, that's right. That's when you're going. I don't want to go too far into the weeds. So, and I'll mention also the involuntary discharge, because this is something that does come up from time to time. Most of the conflicts involve an issue regarding payment, but technically there are only 4 reasons you can involuntarily discharge someone from the nursing home. The first is medical reasons, meaning they can't adequately take care of your condition in that facility. The second is for the residents' safety. Second is for the safety of other residents. If the resident is violent or posing a risk to other residents in the facility. And the last one is late or non-payment of the bill. And this one I see used sometimes, and sometimes can be tied into that Medicaid problem. So just something to know about. You do have rights if they file an involuntary discharge to fight it. So.
And notice of an involuntary discharge is supposed to go to the ombudsman if you're in a skilled nursing facility. And it's actually, there's legislation out there right now to have that change for any type of long-term care facility. But know that your ombudsman is also there to help if you get an involuntary discharge notice, or even if somebody's telling you need to leave the facility and they never handed you a piece of paper about that, they're in violation. They have to be giving you a piece of paper on that. There is another YouTube video from one of our meetings on that as well. So if this ever happens, call your ombudsman and watch that YouTube video on that. Absolutely.
Okay. I want to mention end of life issues because I do think there is some tie-in here with getting not only are you entitled to the medical care that you want during your lifetime, you also should be entitled to determine the level of care you get and whether you want care as you approach the end of life. And nursing homes sometimes have some biases here. And so I think it's important that your wishes are clear. So the first area I'll stop at is hospice and palliative care. Most of the nursing homes will advise you of the right to have hospice care get involved. If anyone is not familiar, hospice care is basically comfort care, where they're not trying to treat your condition, they're just trying to keep you comfortable for the balance of your life. And if you've had an experience with hospice, most people, it's a very good experience. They're wonderful people and they can make you comfortable at the end of life. My 2 concerns in the nursing home context related to hospice care is, number 1, I find that they often call hospice too late. And so they tend to call when they see that the patient is dying. And really the standards for hospice is if it is likely that you are going to pass away in the next 6 months. And so sometimes a person could have been being kept comfortable and allowed to pass on peacefully at a much earlier point than hospice is actually called in. So as a family member, you should be asking the question, is it time for us to talk to hospice? Should we be having hospice be involved? And Medicare will pay for that, as you mentioned. So
I know I had another girlfriend whose mother is in hospice right now, and when they put her on it, she was very amazed at how wonderful hospice was because of the additional support. The nursing home still has to give her mother the same care that she was being given, but then they also have the hospice care on top of it, as well as also assistance with paying for some of the additional supplies that her mother needed to be able to, for her end of life experience, which what really made my girlfriend have much more peace of mind as her mother is nearing her final stage of life.
Yeah. And then a companion to that is palliative care. So hospice is focused on the last 6 months of life. Palliative care can be beyond 6 months. And I find that nursing homes don't often bring up the option of palliative care, but they can be involved well before the end of the patient's life and can help to make them more comfortable. They generally stop in at least once a month to check in on the patient, make sure their medications are good, that they're comfortable, that they're not taking things they don't need to take. I found it was really helpful, and in my father's case, I can tell you I had to kind of advocate for it, but once it got there, it was a big help. The other complaint I have sometimes about nursing homes and hospice or palliative care is that there's a trend right now of them trying to direct you towards a hospice or palliative care that is owned by the parent company of the nursing home, where they have essentially they can earn some money by running a hospice program. That isn't inherently bad, but some of the hospice programs or palliative programs that are sponsored by the nursing home are not necessarily the best ones. So if you're not satisfied, or if you want to make the choice, you have the right to choose any hospice program you want. As long as that program is willing to come into that nursing home, you're not limited to only the options that the nursing home puts in front of you.
And on that Care Compare site, that Medicare.gov that you shared at the beginning, also has hospice as part of that now. So you could go to that to be able to compare the hospices to each other, so you can make a good decision as well, an empowered decision.
Yeah. You also have rights to refuse treatment, and that can be directly, meaning yourself, or if you have a properly drafted power of attorney, your agent has the rights to refuse treatment. I find that this comes up a lot in the case of dementia. It's very specific, and for some people it's a little touchy, so I'll just describe the situation. The law and your lawyer are neutral on this topic, or at least they should be. In other words, if you are a person that wants to squeeze every last day out of life, even with last stage dementia, that is perfectly okay, and you have the right to advocate for that. But I also see a lot of people who say, when I'm in late stage dementia, I do not want to squeeze every last day out of life. I want to pass peacefully at the first opportunity.
Yep.
Those are the kind of two ends of the spectrum. But you have the right to advocate for either. And there's a lot of care that happens in the last year of a dementia diagnosis that should be considered optional, and which is not always presented as optional. So each medical event that comes up should be a time that the nursing home comes to you and poses the question, do you want this treatment? As opposed to, we started them on antibiotics, we're sending them to the hospital, we're going to start a feeding tube, so on and so forth.
Right.
Each of those should be a discussion. So just be aware that if you're on this more on the side of the spectrum of comfort and not extension of life, you may want to be a little alert here to what should happen. And tied to that is your right to a living will and a POLST. POLST is what used to be known as a DNR. I think everyone who's in a nursing home, they certainly should have been offered the opportunity to get that. And so I'm going to not spend a lot of time on it. But...
And we actually had POLST Illinois. They did a session on us on POLST. So if you're curious what POLST is all about, please do watch that YouTube video too. This is great that a lot of this stuff is, that you touch on it, because there are other resources there. So thank you.
Awesome. And then obviously have an advocate. This is true across the whole healthcare system. Ideally, your power of attorney person should also be knowledgeable and willing to advocate for you. It shouldn't be necessary, but nursing homes, hospitals, they're human. They're trying to do the right thing, but it does help to have somebody who's looking out for you.
And the ombudsman is always there for that. Know that.
Absolutely.
And in every care facility, there should be a poster. If you're not sure how to get a hold, you can always go to the Department on Aging's website, as well as anybody can email me, and I will put my email in the chat as well. A question did come up. Do therapies that a client is getting before hospice have to end? Do clients have the right to keep this if they wanted, for example, therapies? I mean, if they then were to then obtain hospice services. So I think the question is really, can you keep hospice going? Can you keep therapy going when you have hospice? And that was, Eric, I don't know if you can answer that for us.
I'm not sure I can. I have heard some conflicting things about that. Hospice is geared towards keeping you comfortable as you're reaching the end of life, as opposed to rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And so I'm not positive. I would argue in favor of it on the patient's behalf, but I'm not sure where the public policy would come down on that.
Yeah, I think if it is, and I don't want to, speak for it being the definite hard line answer, but if it's something that is not that's preventing the pain, if it's something like a massage or something where a little bit of ranging on that range of motion, just to be able to keep people pain-free, because that's what hospice is all about, is quality to the end of life. But you need to ask the hospice company that you're working with that, because a lot of this is related to Medicare billing and what Medicare will allow and won't allow for hospice agencies to do.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk just a little bit about advocating for quality care. I think everyone who's on this today probably has got some experience with this. Couple things, just go to the care plan meetings. I think it's useful to get an email address or phone number for the people who are at those meetings, so that you know how to reach them. That was always one of my big complaints in the nursing home, is trying to get a hold of somebody at any given time of day can be really difficult. And that care plan meeting is the one time they all have to be there.
Yeah.
And you've got them, and you might as well find out how to get in touch when you need to. So residence councils, you guys know more about that probably than me at this point, but I think they're great, and make sure that you take advantage of that. Don't hesitate to insist on talking to the doctor from time to time. Nursing home doctors, it's like they're hidden from view, and it's deliberate. And it's not because they're awful people. It's because they have, hundreds and hundreds of patients spread over multiple nursing homes. And if they answered questions for everybody, they'd never get through it all. So they tend to come first thing in the morning when no family member is anywhere in sight, leave instructions with the nurse, and tell the staff that they should only communicate with the nurses who will call them. It's embarrassing that it's like that. And you really have to sometimes insist, no, I want the phone number for the neurologist that saw my parent. And then you reach out to them and tell them, I have a question about the care. You really sometimes have to fight for it, but that should be a right rather than something you have to beg for.
So true.
And be knowledgeable about the details of the condition your relative has. There's a whole lot you can watch out for if you know their specific condition. Every medical condition has some common complications. And if you know what complications to be watching for, you'll do a much better job of spotting them if they're not catching everything. And the last thing I'll say is just don't always just criticize. Nobody really responds great to criticism. It's important to give constructive criticism when someone's not getting the care they should get. But by the same token, when you see an employee that is underpaid, overworked, and never thanked, keep in mind that if you tell them thank you, bring them some donuts one day, Even just
Mhm.
telling them you did a great job, better yet, tell their boss that they did a great job. That can go a really, really long ways. So,
Yes, very much so, because, and I always also tell people to remind everyone, to remind them sometimes that the reason why I'm saying this, because I really love my mom. And I just want to make sure that she gets the best, to bring it back to that personal level. I love my parent and know that this is really difficult for me right now. So I have questions for you that I really need to get answered, because this is my mom we're talking about, as I know for your mom, you'd want the same thing. I think
yep,
sometimes people just need to be reminded of that.
absolutely. Okay. I also just wanted to throw in a couple of common nursing home injuries. At various points in my career, I've done some nursing home neglect cases. And so, I have a pretty good sense. What always strikes me is that the injuries, despite all kinds of medical conditions, are almost always the same. If you look at all the nursing home neglect cases, they fall into just a few major categories. And I feel like sometimes consumers don't know this. So falls, far and away, probably the biggest are simple falls. If a patient is a fall risk, they are supposed to identify them as a fall risk, and they're supposed to take precautions, such as putting their bed in a low position, putting down fall mats, making sure the call light is within reach and people actually respond to it. A lot of these things happen just because the person needs to go to the bathroom, they press the call light, nobody responds, and so they try to get up on their own, and they fall. Simple as that. So just know that falls is a big thing, because often the fall results in a hip fracture. You get a hip fracture, you can't walk very well. If you don't walk very well, you develop bed sores. It doesn't always go that way, but let's say it's common enough that every lawyer that's ever done a nursing home neglect case knows all about it. Bed sores, they can happen under normal circumstances, particularly right near the end of life, even with good care, but they often happen as a result of bad care. If a person is bedbound or they don't move very easily, they are supposed to be repositioned at least every 2 hours. And if they aren't, they'll develop bed sores. And if you've never seen a bad one, I'm happy for you. I hope you never do. But they are really nasty sores that can go all the way down to the bone, and that it's almost impossible to keep them from becoming infected. An infection can kill you if it's not treated. They're also really hard to cure once they form. So the best thing that can happen is the nursing home tells you about it as soon as they spot a bed sore. And when that happens, you and your advocate and the patient are right on top of it saying, what are you doing? Is the wound care team assigned to this? How often are they coming in? Is there a repositioning schedule? What's being done about this? It's just a bad way to die. You don't want to die that way.
No.
In bad facilities, it's a rampant problem. In good facilities, it still happens sometimes, but they can respond to it. So, okay, medication errors is another big one. Perhaps bigger than that is poor communications. So if they spot a potential infection and then they call the doctor and the doctor is slow responding with a prescription, and then the nursing home is slow in noticing the doctor issued the prescription, and then the pharmacy is slow in getting the medication back, and maybe it wasn't the antibiotic that was best for this infection, and that process repeats, where they contact the doctor to say, hey, maybe we need to do a check to see if it's responding to this, and the doctor is slow responding again. Suddenly you've got an infection that went on for 6 days. That can become a really big deal. So just as an advocate for somebody in a nursing home, be aware of that. First sign of infection, you want to make sure they're getting an antibiotic and that it's responding to treatment. And if not, are they looking at a different antibiotic? All right. Last thing I'm going to touch on, and then I'll leave it open for questions for a couple of minutes, is reporting abuse and neglect. I included the number for Illinois Department of Public Health. There's a 1-800 number you can call anytime. They do investigate. Is it perfect? No, but it can be a good resource. If you believe there was neglect, it is important to make that call and report it. Your local ombudsman, of course, probably the best resource for solving the problem and solving it quickly. Obtaining documentation, if it's something really bad or if it resulted in a death, remember you are entitled to the complete record and you should get it. That means the patient during their lifetime, the agent under power of attorney, and after death, the family is entitled to that record. That's usually the best way you can find out exactly what happened. And you have the right to consult a private attorney if you want to pursue that route. There's pros and cons to it, but it's an appropriate remedy in some situations. I think I'm going to skip this just because I'd like to leave time for questions. So let me stop sharing my screen and ask if anyone wants to ask anything.
If anybody would like to, you could please feel free to unmute your, unmute your microphone, and please do it, or you could type it in the chat. I know we did have some of those that were coming through as we were talking. I also recognize that it is the top of the hour, and so people may need to be leaving. So what I will do right now is I will go ahead and end the recording of the meeting, but I will keep it open for those of you who may want to ask a question. So I just want to thank you, Eric, before I stop the recording. Thank you so much. I really got a lot out of this today, and I'm really feeling that a lot of other people did too. So this is a really important conversation that we had, and I will be referring people to this video because it's it will be really helpful for people. So I'm going to go ahead and stop right now.
Right.